Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining me for my episode today. I do not have a guest that I'm interviewing. Instead, I am dedicating this episode to my son, Ian, for his birthday. Ian's birthday is September 4th. He would be 25 years old this year if he was still with us. So I want to say a little bit about the story of what happened to Ian. If you've read my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, you already know much of this. But for those who haven't, just to kind of give you a brief overview. In 1999, I was expecting my third child. I treated with two midwives and a medical doctor. And when my pregnancy went a week past my due date, the doctor suggested an induction. This was for a couple reasons. First, because I was past my due date, but mainly because he was already over 10 pounds and they were worried about a delivery of a baby that large if I went any longer with my pregnancy. So what I didn't know then was that the induction drug that I was given is not currently, certainly was not then, FDA approved for labor induction. It is a drug that is used to end pregnancies in other countries. It's called misoprostol. And what the medical community has found is that when you administer it to pregnant women, it causes severe contractions, which can induce labor. But it's always, or quite often, I should say, a very fast labor, very strong labor. So in my case, my second child, I had her with no medications, so I knew what a natural childbirth felt like. And yet with Ian's labor, it was probably 100-fold times worse. It was indescribable. The pain was indescribable. The medication caused hyperstimulation of my uterus, which caused contractions, some of which lasted 4 minutes in length. Keep in mind that during contractions, the baby is not getting any oxygen because the uterus is contracting, so the baby's not getting any oxygen during that time. So Ian went through several of those types of contractions during that last part of my labor. Well, during that time, especially once the contractions started to get so incredibly painful and long, I begged, and I am not one to ever beg, but I begged the midwives to stop my labor and transport me to the hospital. During my pregnancy care, prenatal care, they told me over and over again that if anything started to go awry, they could administer a medication to me called terbutaline and transport me to the hospital, which was 2 blocks away on the same street. So I was begging again for them to stop my labor and take me, and they continued to ignore me. They told me that if they did so, I would be pushing my baby out in the car. So it was just impossible for them to do it. I should just stay there. However, it was 2 more hours before Ian was born from the time I first started begging to be taken to the hospital. When Ian was born, he was gray and lifeless. He looked like a alien baby, something from a sci-fi show. My husband had a video recording of his birth, of Ian's birth. It was meant to be a lovely keepsake for us. However, what it recorded was that during the final 20 minutes of my labor, Ian had no heartbeat. The midwives were checking with their various equipment and there was no heartbeat detected. So he went without oxygen for all those long contractions and for the final 20 minutes of my labor. When he was born, the midwives tried to resuscitate him. It was clear that he was not alive, so they were trying to resuscitate him. They tried to use their ambu bag and various things, but they could not get him to show any signs of life. 911 was called about 5 minutes after Ian was born. Paramedics arrived, they intubated Ian, and within a few minutes, he went from gray to blue and then eventually to pink. He was whisked away to the hospital. Again, the nearest hospital was 2 blocks away, where he was treated in their emergency room. When it was determined that he needed to go to Seattle Children's Hospital, he was transported down there and was entered into the neonatal intensive care unit, or the NICU. After I was able to get up and be transported, my husband and I drove down to the hospital to see Ian. When we got into the NICU, the nurse that was taking care of Ian came over to me, and she had me sit down, and she put Ian in my arms. It was the first time I'd held him. Then she gave me the tissues that I knew I was going to need at that point. Over those first few days while Ian was in the NICU, the doctors didn't have any idea what was going on. What had happened was the midwives, after I was transported away, put together Ian's birth record. This was in paper format prior to electronic medical records, and they falsified the records. And they wrote on the records that he'd had a heartbeat all the way up until he was born. So because of the falsified birth record, the doctors at Children's didn't have any idea what was going on. Why was this child so severely disabled? What was happening? He couldn't breathe. He was having constant seizures. So he was intubated so the machine could breathe for him. And he was given high doses of medications to try to control the seizures. So he remained there for, well, he was there for about 2 months total, but in those first couple of weeks, again, because the doctors didn't know the truth of what his delivery had been like. They were doing tests, imaging scans, so on and so forth. And they came and told my husband and I that, they didn't really know what the extent of his injuries were, but that he probably would have some form of cerebral palsy. They said he will probably be, unable to ambulate around, as a normal person, but, you can make arrangements in your home and so on to accommodate that. I remember one young doctor telling us that he probably would not be an Olympic champion, but she thought maybe he could be a chess champion when he grew up. So during those days, Ian was resuscitated more times than I can count. I can remember numerous times where I would be holding him and he would stop breathing, and I would gently nudge him and rub his back. And my mantra was, Ian, breathing is fundamental. About 2 weeks after he was born, my husband stayed home and I went to the hospital alone. And my husband decided to watch that birth video. He just wanted to know, what are we missing? What happened? What's going on? Of course, when he watched the birth video was when we discovered that Ian had no heartbeat, no heart tones at all for the final 20 minutes of labor. So when Dylan got to the hospital and he told the doctor that, he asked the doctor, would you be surprised if I told you that the birth video shows no heart tones for the final 20 minutes of Ian's labor? And the doctor said, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. The doctor then described to us some of the treatments that they might have done for Ian had they known the truth when Ian was first there, including a hyperbolic oxygen chamber, also a cap that uses cold to keep the brain from swelling. But of course, because of the falsified record, they had no idea what they were dealing with. So those options were not considered, and no fault of the doctors. They had no idea. Ian was diagnosed with stage 3 HIE, which is a diagnosis given if the brain has been deprived of oxygen for a long period of time, typically during a birth injury. Stage 3 is the worst of the types of phases of this injury. And at that point in time, he was given 0 chance to survive. At that point, like I said, Ian was about almost 2 months old. We had been encouraging his constantly being revived at that time, whether the nurses or my husband and I when we were there. But once we heard that diagnosis and we confirmed by our own research how dire it was, that was when we placed Ian on a DNR. We did that because we knew that we could continued treatments to keep Ian alive, but we also knew that there was no fixing what was wrong with him and that his condition was very severe, and his quality of life would be very poor and get even worse the longer he lived. So the same day that my husband and I placed the DNR, do not resuscitate order on Ian, Ian stabilized. He didn't have any more of the episodes where he stopped breathing. So I don't know if you believe in things happening for a reason or a purpose or whatever it might be, or whether Ian had something he wanted to hang around for. That's kind of where I think about it. So since he'd stabilized, there really wasn't any reason to keep him in the hospital anymore. All we needed was the proper resources in place so that we could take him home and care for him at home, where of course the doctors didn't expect him to live very long. So our insurance plan covered home nursing care. And we worked with a hospital social worker to get everything in place. A home nursing agency, suction equipment for maintaining Ian's airway, and medications, so on and so forth. So that process took about a week, which I remember thinking at the time that was a long time, but really for all that needed to be put into place, that was pretty amazing that it happened in a week. And again, the docs didn't expect Ian to live long at all, especially once he was home with, parents caring for him and the home nurse, and of course the do not resuscitate order. It was pretty clear he wasn't going to make it very long. So prior to Ian's birth, my husband and I, we were living in a 3-story home, and the bedrooms were on the top floor, and Ian's bedroom was a little nursery right off the master bedroom. And I purchased this beautiful carved oak crib, and I made all these wonderful little quilts for my baby that I was expecting. So when we brought Ian home, especially with the home nursing care, having him upstairs was not feasible. It meant people having to climb up and down stairs to go to and from the kitchen for medications. The bathtub was on the main floor, and Ian needed special equipment to be bathed and so on. So I had an office on the home floor that we converted into a bedroom, and we moved Ian into the bedroom on the main floor. We had somebody donated a hospital crib to us, which was very helpful because we were able to elevate the head of the bed. Part of Ian's injuries were that he had no suck or swallow reflex. He didn't have a gag reflex, so he couldn't protect his airway. So anything we would try to put in his stomach, for example, if you were to try to feed him, he would inhale it and have aspiration pneumonia. So prior to bringing him home from the hospital, he had a surgically implanted feeding tube so that all of his medications could be given to him directly into his intestines rather than into his stomach. He didn't have any purposeful movement, nothing that he couldn't like reach out and touch something or move around purposefully. He had the mentality even toward the end of his life of about a 2-month-old infant. He delighted in certain things. He liked the color yellow, for example. Something about that color yellow just made him smile. He loved to be spun around in his wheelchair. He would laugh and giggle at that. And that was the things we had that were really kind of fun to do with Ian. He took several medications every day. I think, if I remember back correctly, it was like 17 or 18 different medications he took, some of those more than once a day, all of them liquid through that feeding tube. We had to kind of find medications that worked to control his seizures. He had hundreds of seizures a day. So finding the right medication balance was a job that our medical doctor, the pediatrician, as well as Ian's pediatric neurologist worked on and came up with a great series of medications and doses that helped us to keep Ian comfortable, although those had to change on a regular basis throughout his life as he became more tolerant to certain medications. So after we brought Ian home, about 30 days into this process, our insurance company, which again, our policy covered home nursing care, our insurance company decided that they were no longer going to cover the home nursing care. At the time, we were getting 12 hours a day of care. We would have a nurse come at 7 in the morning. That one would stay for one shift, and then we would get the second one would come to stay for the next shift. And my husband and I would take turns at night listening for alarms and taking care of whatever needed to be done with Ian. What that meant was for all the years of Ian's life, I think each of us maybe averaged 3 or 4 hours of sleep per night. And to this day, 20 years after Ian's death, alarms, the sound of alarms going off always triggers me to where I have to know what is that alarm, what's happening, and how can we stop it from happening to something's wrong. So once we had the nursing care in place and the insurance company decided they didn't want to cover it anymore, it became obvious, as I'm sure many of my listeners know, the US healthcare system is not designed for the patient in mind. It's designed for keeping money into the insurance company's pockets. And that was certainly the case with us, with Ian. So my husband reached out to the media, and a reporter came to our house and interviewed us about Ian and what was going on with our insurance company. So our insurance company, once the media reached out to them, they extended the nursing care for another 30 days. They wanted to get the media spotlight off of them and said, you can have 30 more days of nursing care. Toward the end of that time, they then said the nursing care is custodial and doesn't have any curative effect of any kind, no medical need for it. And they suggested that we should put Ian up for adoption, let him become a ward of the state so that he could be covered under Medicaid, since our insurance wouldn't cover the home nursing care. They suggested that we find volunteers from a local church group or a children's after-school program, which clearly shows the lack of information as far as what care he needed, with constant suctioning of his airways, keeping him hydrated, keeping his feeding tube in place, and giving him all those medications throughout the day. That wasn't something a volunteer from my church was going to be able to do. So after the second 30 days, the insurance company again said it's palliative care and it is not needed, it's custodial, and we're not going to cover it any longer. So we'd already gone to the media, and that worked for the one bit of 30 days, but now we needed something more. It was the year 2000 by now, February of 2000, and the presidential primaries were in full swing. Al Gore was running against Bill Bradley in the presidential primaries, and both of them came to Washington State where we lived, and my husband wanted to see if he could get in to visit with one of them, thinking that perhaps, especially in a campaign year, a politician would hear our story and take it up and be even more forceful than the media had been. So my husband worked to try to get hold of Bill Bradley. He was unsuccessful. No one from the Bradley campaign would return his call. So then he reached out to Al Gore, and the Al Gore campaign did get back to him and invited my husband, me, Dylan, and Ian and Ian's nurse to visit Al Gore in his hotel room down in downtown Seattle while he was in town campaigning. We told him our story, and he was outraged and said, this is absolutely not okay. And he invited us to come to a rally he had scheduled for later that day in Seattle. So we come to the rally, Dylan and me and the nurse and Ian, and Gore gets up on stage and he starts to tell our story. And then he looks directly into a camera and he says, don't do this. Don't cut this child's coverage. Don't do this. And he was talking to the insurance company. Well, the media at that rally went crazy. So we were swarmed with media wanting to get statements and stories and interviews, and we needed to get Ian home. We didn't expect to be there as long as we'd been there, and he needed his medication doses and he needed to sleep and so on. So we handed out our contact information so that these reporters could call us and schedule a time to perhaps come to our house to talk to us about what was going on. By the time we got home, we had, and this is back in answering machine days, no, not voicemail like we have today, but we had, I think, something like 100 calls, messages from different media outlets wanting to do interviews with us about our situation. So we did have a couple of reporters come out that day. We didn't want to overtax ourselves for sure. Ian was not part of most of the interviews because he was in his room with his nurse. And then we got a call that night from the Today Show. and they wanted to know if Dylan and I would come down to Seattle to be recorded, to be interviewed on the Today Show the following morning. So we said yes, we would do that. So a car came to pick us up. I think it's about 3 o'clock in the morning our time, to take Dylan and Ian and me downtown Seattle, where we were interviewed on the Today Show remotely. And what we didn't know until we got there was that the Today Show had arranged for the CEO of our insurance company to also be on the Today Show. And they asked him, when they had him on there, about our care, and he kept saying, well, he didn't know that a letter had gone out, trying to stop the care, because they wouldn't have stopped the care. That was obviously an error. Now, mind you, I'm holding Ian during this time, or the cameras are on and the audio is on, and Ian's breathing. I don't mean this to sound like a joke, but he breathed like it was Darth Vader. That's because he didn't clear his airway. So here we have this beautiful, beautiful infant that I'm holding, who sounds like Darth Vader. And this insurance executive is on the screen as well. And I cannot imagine how that must have been for him. So my husband, who was always pretty quick on the fly about these things, jumped in and said, so, Mr. Executive, are you saying that you will not stop end Ian's coverage unless it's in concert with his treating physicians? And the CEO said, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So from that point on, we didn't have any more trouble with our insurance company trying to take away our home nursing care. Although we were often said that, politicians and reporters have more power with insurance companies than pediatricians do, which is a very sad thing to say. So we went on about our lives. Our plan was to keep Ian as comfortable as possible. That we were able to do with medications. We had home oxygen, various things that we could use to try to keep him comfortable, try to keep his seizures under control. At the age of 18 months, he was diagnosed with chronic pneumonia, even though he wasn't fed orally. Just breathing in his own secretions and inhaling those caused pneumonia. And that was hard, because for us, I should say, because it was hard watching him struggle to breathe all the time, even while he was sleeping. That was tough. So Ian lived to be 4.5 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep at home due to his birth injury. Now, when I was pregnant with Ian, I did what a lot of people do. I thought, oh, I have all these lessons I'm going to teach my child. I really want him to grow up to be a good man. What I found during Ian's life was that our roles were reversed. I wasn't supposed to help him to become a better man. He was here to help me become a better person. So during his life and after he died, I did a lot of thinking about what have I learned? What have I learned? And I've always been one of these people that I want to learn something from bad situations. Otherwise, it feels like the situation happened with absolutely no benefit. It's just useless and stupid. So what did I learn from my Ian? Well, I learned that sometimes you just need to slow down and think about something as simple as the color yellow. My children have learned as well. My oldest daughter, for example, was always very comfortable around children with disabilities, whereas a lot of kids, they shy away. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. But my daughter would go right up and say hi. She's very comfortable. She got a degree in early childhood education because she wants to work with kids. How my life has changed? Well, at the time I had Ian, I was working full-time. I was an executive in healthcare leadership. My measurement of success was how many letters after my name, how many degrees I had, and how much money I made. That was really what I thought was success. But I realized because of Ian that actually is not. I mean, yes, one can live a comfortable life if that's what they think success is, but it really wasn't what happiness was. And um, I learned that making plans very far ahead in the future was not always the way to go, because you never know how much time you have and what the future is going to hold. So I think I would say my biggest lessons from Ian were to not take things for granted, to appreciate the things that you have in your life, um, and to look for those lessons. I've also learned that reaching out and helping other people is a great part of making sense of what happened to my family. And so I do want to say that if anyone listening knows someone who's gone through something or is going through something similar to what I've described, there are things you can do, and there's things you should not do. So things you can do, go over and help them out. In my case, I had friends that would come and take my two older kids to the zoo or out for an ice cream or something, just so that they could have a break from this household where, it was so focused on Ian's medical needs and so on. I do also want to point out a couple things I want to make sure you never say to someone who has gone through the loss of a loved one. Don't ever tell them that they're in a better place or that it was meant to be. Please do not use Bible verses or any other type of religious scripture verses. Those things, they don't help. They don't help. I had somebody say to me at Ian's funeral, "It's a good thing you have other children," with the idea being that I wouldn't be as devastated losing one because I already had two others, like Ian was a pair of shoes. So I realize sometimes those comments are, we want to help people, we want to say something helpful, but please think first before you say something that really isn't helpful. It's actually hurtful. And silence is absolutely okay too. Just sit and let the person talk. Tell me about your son or your husband or whoever it is that's passed away. Tell me about him. And most of us, when we talk about the people we loved and lost, we smile, we're happy about that. I frequently say sometimes the memories come down my face in liquid form. However, I do want to say that I wish my boy a very happy birthday. Happy heavenly birthday. I miss you, Ian. I know you're with me. I feel you when you're, especially when I'm having a really bad day. I feel you with me. And I am so happy that I was chosen to be your mom. So thank you all for hearing me out today and listening to my story about Ian. I do wish you all well and hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that the stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.